Well, the best part of being mayor of Oradell is the opportunity to meet so many different people in our community and hear their concerns and try to address them as best we can while thinking about the greater good. I am probably most happy when I see the children take the lead. For instance, a Girl Scout troop came before us with an issue. They were able to find their voice and present to us a need in the community, and the council listened to them, respected their desires and plan, and we implemented it. And I'm talking about the refillable water station at Memorial Field. So, you know, to see the children speak out on their issues, to meet with the seniors, hear about their issues, to meet with other people in the community, young families, hear their concerns and try to address them, that's the best part of being mayor. And I look forward to another term because I want to continue the work that we've begun. Our team has really accomplished a lot in the past 4 years. There's still a lot to be done, and I want to see it through to fruition.
I am a 31-year resident. I've married for 33 years to Ruth. I have a son, Derek, who's 30, and a daughter, Dana, who's 27. And I decided 3 years ago to join the planning board for a variety of reasons, mainly because I saw some dramatic changes going on in terms of increases in residences in surrounding towns. And I noticed a decline in our restaurants over the past 30 years. And the reason that we chose Oradell to move into was because we wanted an ideal-sized town. We wanted a town with good school systems, good rec fields, good restaurants, lower taxes than the surrounding towns, and Oradell fit the bill. So that's why we moved here 31 years ago.
So like Diane, being on the council has been more rewarding than I thought it ever would be. I moved to Oradell in 1990. I was 10 years old, coming from a small apartment in Queens, and I remember seeing all the trees and the grass and thinking, wow, this is the most beautiful town I've ever seen in my life. My parents drove me down to the elementary school, and I remember thinking the building looked as majestic as the White House, and I couldn't believe that this is where we were living. Fast forward 30 years, and now I'm still living in the house that I grew up in. My son is the same age I was when I came, and just to see him being able to live the same quality of life that I have is very rewarding to me. I think the more I am involved and the more I learn about the town, the more motivated I am and the more I want to do more in this town. Because you see the countless individuals who are so dedicated, from our borough employees to the volunteers that run this town. It's just, you know, I want to be more involved and continue this legacy for other residents.
You actually just reminded me of something from when I was a little girl. I lived in Valley Stream at the time on Long Island with my family, and I used to walk to the middle school, and every day I would pass this white house that had this white picket fence around it that I thought was so majestic and looked like either the White House or something like that, and I often wondered, wow, who lives there? And I ultimately found out that the man who lived there was Dominic Minerva, who was an attorney and the mayor of our town. And I said, wow, maybe someday I could be an attorney and a mayor. And here I am. So it's
full
really
circle.
Full circle, yeah. Probably the biggest challenge facing the borough is the rising real estate taxes. That has always been an issue, and it's an issue in Bergen County, and it's one that's very difficult to tackle. There are certain costs that we just cannot control, both at the municipal level and at the county and school level, but there are smart ways to increase our ratables without putting additional burdens on this town. And I know John has spoken about those ways of doing that in several different arenas. But we have to continue to work to keep our debt load down, and we've started to accomplish that by rolling off debt each year and not bonding as much as we roll off. We've implemented a pay-as-you-go program, which takes money from our operating budget to pay for capital projects, so we're not paying long-term interest on these projects. And we've also participated in the LISO program through help with Congressman Josh Gottheimer's office, which has allowed the borough to obtain $1 million in equipment for tens of thousands of dollars rather than millions of dollars. So that's the challenge. We want to keep our seniors in the community. We want to keep them living in the homes that they raised their family in, with their friends and support network. So we have to find a way to reduce the tax burden without reducing services.
Right, and
So-
even if everything were to stay the same, just the rising cost of healthcare,
Right.
our pensions, our
Exactly.
Yeah.
The things we cannot control.
right. And the number one complaint that we hear is our rising taxes. And yes, we have a superior school system, which I understand and can justify some of it. But the 27% of the budget that we control and that we can oversee, that's where we can make the biggest impact. And the more successful our businesses are in town, the more valuable those pieces of property become. And so the tax burdens that would normally roll over to us as taxpayers and residents will be offset by the businesses in town.
And we've seen that in terms of the tax certiorari proceedings that have been occurring over the past several years. They're mostly in our commercial business district because their taxes are determined not by the value of their property so much, but by the income that they derive. And when you have vacant office buildings and you have vacant storefronts, landlords can then appeal their taxes, which we've seen. The commercials come down and the burden is placed on our residential properties, and we just cannot tolerate that.
And in terms of the 60% plus that goes to the school budget, that is an area that we can directly affect in terms of how we implement our affordable housing.
Yes.
Because if we go the private developer route for implementing our affordable housing, it's going to trigger a major increase in our school budgets because our schools are at capacity. So even a minor increase in residences is going to force a build out of our schools in all three levels, at OPS, at the middle school, and the high school. So we have to do everything we can to make sure we don't inadvertently trigger a residential increase that blows up the school budget and in turn blows up the taxes. It's 60% of our budget. That's the one thing that we absolutely have to control.
Yes. And in addressing that, the affordable housing obligation, which we've often spoken about, the project with Habitat for Humanity actually allowed the borough to have 4 units credited to our allocation without putting a burden on the school district, and we look forward to developing other things like that, including special needs housing, which would give us a 2-for-1 credit. And when I talk special needs housing, I'm talking about the many families in our community who have children with special needs that will age out of the system at some point, 21, and then they're put on a housing wait list. Well, if we could develop that housing in our own community where they could stay with this support system, then we would get a 2-for-1 credit on every bed we build, and that would help us solve our affordable housing problem without overdevelopment.
Yeah, and Diane is the only mayor in all of the surrounding towns that's talking about an alternative to the private developer funding for affordable housing. Emerson is a perfect case in point, right next door. They only had 17 houses that they needed to build for affordable housing. They're building 147 houses because they went with the private developer funding method. Diane has led the way in 2 alternatives. The special needs housing that she mentioned doesn't increase our residential headcount one bit.
Right.
No change in the school budgets, no change in the taxes. Her leadership on the Habitat housing builds only 1/7 the number of additional residences as the private developer funding. So 1/7 means we build 8 homes and maybe add 16 students. We don't have to build out any classrooms, we don't have to add any teachers. The private developer model means we build 60 homes, add 120 students, have to build out 5 classrooms in all 3 levels, and add 5 teachers. So her leadership is helping us address the number one issue that our townsfolk is raising, making sure that we minimize our real estate tax increases by efficiently implementing affordable housing, as we just discussed. And the second issue is bringing back the restaurant culture that we had when we moved here 31 years ago. We had, for a small town, a really good selection of restaurants. You know, we had Hagler's, we had
The Giving Tree,
the Mexican Badlands,
Cornucopia,
all gone. And that's one of the things I learned on the planning board, is the reason that they're gone is we had differential ordinances in place that favored professional services like banks and nail salons against restaurants and eateries. I'd like to come on to the council to make sure that we reverse that and hopefully give preferential treatment to restaurants and eateries. You know, I've probably spoken to hundreds of people across town doing the door-to-door campaigning, and the 2 things that have come up, one overwhelmingly is you need to help minimize our tax increases. And the second one is from particularly if a younger person answers the door, we have nothing to do in town. How can we get restaurants back? So I mentioned earlier, those are the two things that I personally also wanted to address because I felt the same way. And I think we have great answers for both, and answers that are very different than our opponent's ticket.
There are a couple of things that have been lingering, and I'd like to see them finished in my next term. One of which is the preservation of the Blauvelt Mansion. When I first decided to run in 2015, that property was in danger of being demolished. The owner of that property was ready to pull a demolition permit. And at that time, I met privately with the former mayor, of Oradell, myself, and the people from Care One, and we were able to get them in touch with the county. And the county and Care One have been in talks for the past 4 years. It's gone not very far, I know that, but that building is still standing. And I really would like to see that building preserved and used in a positive way for the community. The Waterworks property, which the county owns, there have been talks about developing that, revitalizing it, making it a community place for recreation and museum and restaurant. I would like to see that happen.
I think it's important to note also that the Blauvelt Mansion, in our agreement with Fair Share Housing, that agreement protected the Blauvelt Mansion.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that was my biggest fear when we were going through the COA litigation, that the special master would get wind of the fact that we had 4 acres undeveloped in the heart of our community and designate that as an overlay zone for the affordable housing. And by doing it in our central business district, we were able to protect that property from overdevelopment. The last thing I think that I would like to see is a community center built in our town of Oradell, our borough of Oradell. We really have no place for our senior citizens to go, for our children to go, for people of our generation to go and meet in club meetings and things like that. I heard from the Women's Book Club in Oradell that they actually have to pay to rent space in another community because we do not have a space large enough with enough parking for them to meet here within our own borough. That shouldn't be happening. I know the swim club has its struggles, and perhaps in a private-public partnership with the swim club and another private entity, we could develop a beautiful community center there, perhaps have an indoor pool which could be used year-round with other forms of recreation, basketball, and other types of recreation for the children, as well as meeting rooms for our seniors.
Right, and it'd be great to
clubs,
have everyone in one building and not seniors in one area and kids in another.
Exactly. Right. Exactly, because the interactions between our children and our senior citizen community is very valuable, I think, to maintaining the fabric of our community. As you know, that right now OPTV is filming some of the senior citizens who have lived in town for over 70 years. And when we reached out to them, I said to them, without your stories, Oradell is like a tree without its roots. We have to let the children of this community know what life was like when you were a child here. And to your point, Miriam, you're seeing your children relive your experiences. Well, there were many children who came before you who had that opportunity. So.
And actually, it's kind of funny. Tom Kelly and I were having a discussion about the swim club, and we're both avid paddle tennis players. So we're saying, why not install 2 or 3 paddle tennis courts, which are half the size of tennis courts? And you play that year-round outdoors. So this way you have something for every generation in town to use on that property.
Yeah, and if you think about that property, it's adjacent to our DPAC field, which is adjacent to the playground that's going to be renovated and reopened this fall. And that's a playground that's an all-inclusive playground. So children with special needs can have use of that facility as well as all our other children. So it's a great central community meeting place.
Yeah, and we used to belong to the swim club every year when my kids were still here. We would rejoin if we could get more than 2 months of a year use of it.
Right, exactly.
One is the Reformed Church of Oradell. We're no longer members, but we had been for 19 years. And during that time, I was on the consistory for 10 years, including head of finance. And as my stint in head of finance, we balanced their budget for the first time in years. So I hope to use my finance MBA and that finance experience to the betterment of the town by joining the council. The other organization I've been part of for 30 years is Habitat for Humanity. We've been major funders, and we've actually been going down to the Gulf for the last 7 or 8 years, building post-Katrina homes in the Gulf. And we're going again this February. And what that helped me learn was the fact that there's a real misconception about affordable housing. People think it's housing for welfare folks. I heard this actually in one of the council meetings in the audience in the back. What Habitat enables us to do, the household income can be as high as $84,000, which means we can be building affordable houses for the people that take care of us. We can be building them for our teachers, we can be building them for our healthcare professionals and our elder care professionals.
Our police, our firemen.
Yeah, now how great would that be to not only satisfy our state quota, but build homes for the people that take care of us?
John, as you know, I serve on the Family Selection Committee for Habitat for Bergen County, and that has been a very rewarding experience for me and helped me to learn all about the affordable housing obligations and who we really are serving. And the opportunity to go out and meet these families who are living in substandard housing and giving them the opportunity to invest their own sweat equity, 400 hours worth, in their home gives them such a sense of pride of ownership and an ability to take part in the wonderful fabric of Oradell, right, whereas they wouldn't have had that opportunity.
And I wanted to give another nod to Diane, because she proved by building those 4 Habitat homes across from Jay's Pharmacy how nice those homes can be and how well they would fit into the town. And I think they've actually helped all of the surrounding neighbors in terms of their home values.
And further to your point about going to the Gulf and building homes, my daughter-in-law and I had the opportunity to go help rebuild homes in Little Ferry after Sandy. And the families are just so grateful for the help that they get from Habitat for Humanity in that regard. It was a very rewarding experience for all of us.
I think being so involved in the town, whether it's as a den leader or a class mom or serving on the Board of Trustees for the library, but also professionally at the Board of Realtors. I was a chairwoman for the Equal Opportunity Board, and I serve as a member of the Legislative Committee. It helps me stay involved with the issues that are relevant to our residents today. Mm-hmm. When we talk about tax increases, I'm talking to my clients and to my neighbors who they're retired, but they have to leave. Taxes are too high and they don't want to leave, but it's not fair that they don't have any alternatives that allow them to stay in the town that they raise their children, or where they found comfort for the past several years. So I think just always being involved and staying involved, you understand that the issues that we hear about every day are real life issues that our seniors and our residents have to deal with on a day-to-day basis.
You actually reminded me of a very important point. In addition to the Habitat for Humanity homes, the special needs housing that we would like to see developed in our community, we also need to find a way to build senior housing so that people who have raised their children in this community can stay in this community without having the obligation of maintaining their home. Right. They don't need a 4-bedroom, 3-bath home anymore. Right. It's just the 2 of them. We need to find a place to do that, and a developer who will do that for us. I think what I am most proud of is the team that we have built over the past 4 years and the work that we've accomplished. The fact that we've restored a respectability to the council and its operations. There is no more personalization of issues. We may disagree, but we disagree in a respectful, thoughtful manner, and we come to consensus. So I'm very proud of that. I'm very proud of the fact that we said we were going to appoint a police chief, and we did when we were elected 4 years ago. I am also particularly proud of the work that my team has done. I'm particularly proud of the way in which we've reduced our debt load, increased our bond rating, implemented pay-as-you-go capital, repaved our streets in conjunction with utilities to save us money, reestablished the police force at its optimum level so that we can have a patrol officer in town who interacts with the children, which is very important, that the children recognize the police as their friend.
Right. I have to say that being involved in the budget process this past year, I'm so proud to say that we are very careful with our budget. We know exactly what's necessary for the town, and when we go through line by line, we are able to do it in a way that we still provide all of the resources that our residents need, but at the same time, we're not just spending for the sake of spending. It's carefully thought out and planned out, and the fact that our bond rating has increased because of our fiscal responsibilities and how we approach them, I mean, that's something that, you know, will save all of our residents in the long run.
And in the future.
And in the future years, right.
Exactly.
And it already shows in a big way in terms of our relative taxes compared to some of the surrounding towns like Ridgewood and Glen Rock and Horworth and Harrington Park. I have friends who live in all of those towns, and some of them have very comparable houses to mine and properties to mine. Their taxes are double ours. And that's actually one of the reasons we moved here when we were looking, because we looked at a similar house in Ridgewood and in Glen Rock, and the taxes at that time were double ours. So if we want people, particularly young families, to move in, we need to keep those taxes low, particularly with the limitation of state and local taxes now. You can't write off higher taxes. And we're doing a great job relative to our surrounding towns.
So as chair of the Technology and Communications Committee, it's relatively a new committee in terms of what's been accomplished in the past, but I think as a sister to a long life computer nerd, and I say that in the nicest way possible, and a software engineer.
And a Tufts graduate.
I've always known about the incredible breakthroughs that technology has accomplished, but at the same time, the threats have become more and more real. We see towns all over the world, all over the country being held ransom for their data, and even Bergen County community paid over, I think they lost $500,000 to ransomware. I think that was Palisades Park, $460,000.
Pal Park, yes, and Oakland, our neighbor in Bergen County, lost close to $200,000 in Bitcoin that they had to pay to recover their data.
Yeah, and
so
this
it's
past
a very
summer,
real threat.
Right, I think over 23 cities in Texas were targeted. So really, it's a matter of when we're going to be hit and not if. And it doesn't relate necessarily to taxes and anything else that we've been talking about, but it is a real threat.
It does relate to taxes,
because
if
it
we have to pay $200,000 in
right.
ransomware, that's going to impact our tax dollars.
Right. So I think we have to be really diligent in making sure our data is protected, and we have a backup plan and the right software and hardware necessary in order to keep our data protected so that we don't fall victim to this. I've already been in talks with some different vendors to see what options we have, and I think my priority going forward, because the more time passes, the more nervous I get that we could fall victim, that would be my priority to make sure that rolls out.
John?
And actually, I could help in that area because I sold security and cybersecurity solutions for 30 years, and I probably worked for most of those vendors. So I'd be glad to assist, but that's a great issue. My number one issue is how do we effectively implement affordable housing to keep our taxes from rising? And I think my background in finance and MBA, being on the head of finance for the Reformed Church, and being on the planning board for 3 years, combined in a really good way to enable me to effectively implement affordable housing in conjunction with the rest of the team.
I think what I would like to see happen and would like to set as my priority come January, first of all, is us meeting and setting a 5-year capital plan. We do not really have one. While different departments may have their own version of a capital plan, we do not have a complete integrated capital plan for the borough. And I think if we're going to control our capital spending, use pay-as-you-go capital, bond less, we have to start looking at our infrastructure. We have to start looking at different things within the community, different needs, prioritize them, and figure out how we're going to pay for them over the next 5 years. That plan should be put in place and looked at every year, because as things change, it may have to be tweaked. But I think it will be a very important tool for our community, for the council, to manage our budget, manage our taxes, and move forward in a positive way.